That night, the wind screamed as if it wanted to tear the sky apart. Amid the blinding blizzard, a woman fell to her knees, bare hands trembling, helplessly watching her wooden house burn down to its very foundation. The fire raged like a living beast, devouring every memory. The letters, the photographs, the fragments of a life once filled with warmth, all gone in a matter of minutes. And yet, when the flames died and the ashes cooled, there in the heart of that gray ruin stood a single lantern, the only keepsake her late husband had left her, still burning. And from that moment on, her eyes were different. She had seen something deeper, the faint light of faith, of hope. Some said she had gone mad, but others believed that what she saw was the last miracle still left upon this earth. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching tonight? And if you believe that even a single light can save us, can push back the darkest night, then make sure to subscribe and join us for more stories that keep hope and warmth alive. May your evening be peaceful and your heart always warm. It was the kind of night that made even the wolves hide. The wind screamed through the mountains, carrying needles of ice that tore at the world. The streets of Silver Hollow had fallen silent hours ago. Doors were bolted, chimneys sealed. Even the church bell, once the voice of the valley, hung mute beneath its frost. Somewhere far away, a dog howled once and was swallowed by the storm. Inside that vast white silence, only one window still glowed faintly, the cabin on the ridge, where Mary Hale refused to sleep. She was 41, her body lean from years of surviving rather than living. Her auburn hair, streaked with gray, was tied loosely beneath a woolen scarf. Her face bore no vanity, only the quiet endurance of someone who had learned to carry loss without collapsing beneath it. The room around her smelled faintly of pine resin and kerosene, the scent of every lonely winter she had endured since Samuel's passing. A small brass lantern flickered on the table beside her, its flame bending with each gust that rattled the shutters. Outside, the snow fell sideways, swirling in angry spirals. Inside, Mary stood at the window, the faint reflection of her face overlapping the darkness beyond. In her hands, she held a framed photograph. Samuel standing by the barn in his work shirt, sun in his hair, laughter frozen forever in black and white. She brushed the glass with her thumb. "You'd hate a storm like this," she murmured. The sound of her own voice startled her. It had been days since she'd spoken aloud. The storm deepened, pushing against the cabin walls as though trying to crush them. The lamplight trembled. She turned away from the window and looked around at the old rocking chair Samuel built, the rug she'd patched 3 times, the small wooden cross above the door. The fire in the stove was dying, its red glow fading to ash. She poured a little kerosene into the lantern, steady hands betraying years of habit. The lantern had been Samuel's last gift before he vanished 3 winters ago. He'd told her, "When storms come, keep it burning, Mary. Light is stubborn, like you." Now she tightened the wick, wiped the soot from the glass, and whispered a prayer she half remembered. Outside, snow clawed at the window. Inside, she breathed in the faint warmth of the flame, the only proof that something could still live inside the cold. Then, a sound. A hiss. Her eyes darted to the corner near the curtain. The smell thickened, kerosene, sharp and wrong. A sudden flare of orange erupted at the edge of the window frame. For a second she froze, unable to believe it. The curtain curled inward, glowing, then ignited with a soft, terrible whoomph. Mary lunged for it, grabbing a blanket and beating at the flames. But the fire moved too fast. The wind forced its way through the cracks, feeding the blaze like a hungry breath. Sparks leapt to the ceiling, clinging to the beams, spreading like a living thing. Set free. The air turned hot and violent. Smoke rolled low, choking her lungs. The books on the shelf curled and blackened. The rug caught next. The rocking chair went up in a pillar of fire. She coughed, eyes streaming, and heard herself shouting Samuel's name, not for help, but out of instinct, the way the heart calls out for the dead when it's about to break. She reached for the lantern, intending to save it, but the heat drove her back. Flames licked her skirt. She tore at the fabric, stumbled to the door, and burst into the storm. The cold hit her like a blow. Barefoot, she stumbled into the snow, gasping as her breath turned to steam. Behind her, the roof groaned, then caved in with a roar that echoed across the valley. For an instant, the night was lit as bright as dawn, an inferno blooming against the white sky. Mary fell to her knees. The snow burned against her skin, her fingers stiffening as she pressed them into the drifts. The sound of the wind and fire blended, one screaming, the other devouring. The smell of burning pine filled her throat. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw Samuel in the flames, a silhouette, reaching out, whispering something she couldn't hear. But when she blinked, he was gone, and the house collapsed inward, a beast finally feeding on itself. Silence followed. The fire dimmed to glowing ruins, the blizzard closing over it like a shroud. Mary stayed there, frozen, unable to move. She wanted to cry, but couldn't. Tears would have frozen before they fell. The snow kept rising around her shoulders, burying her slowly as the last of the roof hissed and sank. Time drifted away. The storm softened to a dull roar. At some point, she became aware of the light, a faint shimmer through the smoke. At first, she thought it was another illusion, a trick of grief. But there it was again, small, golden, trembling in the distance. Mary forced herself to stand, every muscle heavy as lead. She stumbled toward the ruins, boots forgotten, nightgown stiff with frost. Each step crunched through layers of snow and ash. The wind tore at her hair. Sparks from the dying fire snapped against her skin. But the light stayed, a tiny heart still beating inside the dark. There, half buried beneath a beam, lay the lantern. Its brass frame was scorched, its glass cracked, but the flame inside still burned. Weak, flickering, but alive. She knelt, brushing the snow away, and picked it up carefully. The metal was hot against her palms. She could hear the faint hiss of the wick, the soft flutter of flame struggling for air. Mary stared into it. Her reflection quivered in the cracked glass. Wild eyes, soot-streaked cheeks, lips trembling. The fire's glow turned her tears to gold. For a long moment, she simply breathed, her heart sinking with the rhythm of the light. "You stayed," she whispered. Her voice was raw, half laugh, half sob. The lantern flickered once, as if it had heard her. Around her, the storm wailed again, but it sounded different now. Not angry, almost reverent. She pressed the lantern to her chest. Its warmth seeped into her skin, into her bones. The snow swirled, erasing footprints, softening everything but that circle of light around her. Behind her, the ruins steamed and cooled, the last embers fading to black. Ahead, the ridge was lost to fog. She looked up at the sky. The storm clouds shifted, revealing a pale slice of moon. Its light mixed with the glow of the lantern, and for the briefest moment, the world didn't seem broken, just quiet, waiting. In her mind, she heard Samuel's voice again, calm and distant. "Keep it burning, Mary." So she did. She stood there until her knees trembled, until her breath froze in the air, until the storm swallowed everything except her and the light. And when the dawn finally came, painting the snow in silver and ash, the valley saw a figure still standing, a woman wrapped in smoke and faith, holding a lantern that refused to die, because some lights are not made of oil or flame, but of something the world can't burn away. By morning, the world had turned still. The snow lay deep and unbroken, covering the valley in a silence so sharp it seemed to hum inside the ears. Smoke no longer rose from the ridge, only a gray ghost of it drifting against the pale sky. The air smelled of ash and cold iron. Across the frozen creek, the Millers stood watching. Thomas Miller with his red beard stiff from frost, his wife clutching her shawl tight, their two boys silent beside them. They had seen the glow from their window in the night and come as soon as the wind allowed, but now they hesitated, boots crunching softly in the snow, afraid to disturb what remained. Farther down the path, old Ruth Jenkins, the chapel keeper, trudged uphill with her lantern. She was a small woman wrapped in too many scarves, her cheeks raw from wind, her breath wheezing like an old bellows. She murmured prayers beneath her breath as she walked, her eyes fixed on the blackened shape that had once been Mary Hale's cabin. When she reached the edge of the ruins, she stopped, crossing herself with trembling fingers. Mary stood there, motionless, her coat dusted white, her hair stiff with ice. Her hands were blackened from smoke. Her eyes, hollow and wide, reflected nothing but the wreckage before her. She didn't turn when they spoke. Their voices came to her as faint echoes. "Thank God she's alive. Come, dear, you must warm yourself. The storm's over now." The words slid through her like smoke. What she saw was not them, not the ruin, but the light. Half buried beneath the charred beams, the lantern still burned. The glass was cracked, the brass bent, its wick guttering in the wind. But the flame lived, small and trembling, like a heart refusing to stop. Mary's knees gave slightly as she stepped closer, the snow crunching beneath her. She knelt, reaching out with blistered fingers, brushing soot from the glass. When she lifted it, her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. But when the warmth touched her skin, her breathing steadied. For a long moment, she simply stared into it, her lips parting as though in prayer. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Ruth stepped forward first, placing a gloved hand on Mary's arm. "Come to the chapel, dear. You can rest there." Mary didn't move. "No," she said quietly. Her voice cracked, but held steady. "God left me this light. I intend to keep it." The others fell silent. Snow drifted from the trees, whispering as it landed. Finally, the millers helped clear the debris, covering what little was left with planks. But Mary refused to leave the ridge. She thanked them softly, eyes never leaving the lantern. When they were gone, she gathered what scraps she could, 2 boards, a rusted bucket, a length of canvas, and began to build. By nightfall, a makeshift shelter stood beside the ruins, 4 posts driven into the snow, a tarp stretched tight against the wind. Inside, she spread a blanket on the frozen ground and set the lantern beside her bedroll. The flame wavered, throwing soft gold against her face. She held her palms to it, feeling its gentle heat. It didn't just warm her hands, it steadied her soul. The days that followed moved slowly, marked by the rhythm of survival. At dawn, she gathered driftwood from the creek, melting snow for water, scavenging tins of beans from the wreckage. Sometimes she'd find fragments of the past, a spoon blackened beyond use, a half-burned letter, the buckle from Samuel's boot. Each time she found one, she placed it beside the lantern, as if offering it to the light that had endured. At night, when the wind moaned through the trees, she lay awake watching the flame. It flickered softly, casting long shadows that danced across the tarp. Once, half asleep, she thought she saw the shape of a man's shoulder in that shadow, the tilt of his head, the faintest smile. The image faded before she could speak, but it left her heart oddly calm. Down in the town, the story spread faster than the thaw. At the general store, behind the barrels of flour and salt, whispers grew thick. "She's not right in the head, poor thing." Claims the lantern talks to her. Swears she sees her husband's face in it. The men laughed softly, shaking their heads, but the women spoke in lower tones, pity and fear mixed in their eyes. When Mary came to buy supplies, conversation stopped. She noticed, but she didn't speak. She paid in exact coins, thanked them, and left. The shopkeeper, a stout man named Hollis Crane, watched her through the window, the way she walked straight into the snow without looking back, the lantern's handle glinting faintly from her satchel. "Ain't right," he muttered, but even as he said it, something about her stillness made him uneasy. That evening, the wind returned, not the fury of a storm, but the restless murmur of the hills shifting under the weight of ice. Mary climbed the ridge slowly, the sky dimming to violet. Her breath clouded the air as she approached the shelter, clutching a small bag of bread and salt. She paused when she saw it. Footprints in the snow beside the cabin. They were small, too small to be a man. Mary crouched, tracing one with her glove. The edges were sharp, fresh, no more than an hour old. Her heart quickened. For a moment she thought of the miller's boys, but they lived across the creek. No child would wander this far after dark. She straightened slowly, her gaze sweeping the tree line. The forest stood silent, the pines heavy with snow, their branches sagging under weight. Nothing moved. A crow called once, startling her, then silence again. She exhaled, trying to steady herself, telling her mind not to see what it wanted to see. "Just the wind," she whispered. "Only the wind." Inside, the shelter was cold and dim. She brushed the snow from her shoulders, set down her bag, and reached automatically for the lantern. Her fingers met empty air, the place where it always sat, The little hollow beside her blanket was bare. The faint circle of soot where the base had rested was all that remained. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the floor, the corners, the drifts outside the entrance. Her pulse rose, ears straining for any sound. Nothing, only the whisper of snow sliding off the tarp, the sigh of the wind through the burnt timbers. She stepped outside again, heart pounding. The footprints were still there, leading away from the shelter, two small prints side by side, vanishing toward the creek. In the dim light of dusk, they looked almost fragile, as if made by someone afraid to leave a mark. Mary's breath caught. She took a step forward, then stopped. The cold is a bit deeper now. The horizon bled orange and gray. Somewhere far off, the creek murmured under its ice, a slow, a mournful sound. Her voice trembled as she whispered into the dusk. "Who's there?" No answer came, only the echo of her own question rolling across the snow. And when the wind rose again, it sounded, for just a heartbeat, like a child laughing. Mary stood frozen, the sound fading into the distance, her empty hands trembling at her sides. In the shadows of the ruined cabin, the place where the lantern had once glowed was now completely dark. The night pressed in like a weight. The trees groaned beneath the frost, their branches heavy with snow. Mary stumbled through the drifts, calling until her throat burned. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Her voice cracked, swallowed by the wind. The footprints led away from her shelter, weaving down the slope toward the creek, where the world fell silent and silver under the moonlight. Her boots sank deep into the snow, and the cold bit through the soles. The air was sharp, tasting of iron and smoke, the kind that cuts when you breathe too deep. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of her steps, the rasp of her breath, the soft whistle of wind threading through the pines. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an owl cried once. Then the night fell still again. Mary's heart pounded louder than her own voice. The lantern was gone, and she followed that absence as if chasing her own heartbeat. Then she saw it, a faint glow flickering between the trees. She stopped, holding her breath. The light trembled, pale and golden, casting long shadows across the snow. For a moment, she thought it might be the flame itself calling her home. She moved closer, each step careful, her hands trembling inside her gloves. Down by the frozen creek, beneath the leaning pine, stood a figure, small, barefoot, wrapped in rags that fluttered like torn flags. A boy, no older than 10, clutching the lantern close to his chest. Its glow spilled over his face, a face so thin it looked carved from candle wax. His lips were blue, his eyes wide and wild, reflecting both the flame and the fear inside him. "Put it down, son," Mary said softly, her breath turning to mist. "You'll burn yourself." The boy shook his head weakly. "It was warm," he whispered, voice trembling. "I just wanted to feel warm again." She took another step, snow crunching underfoot. "You took it from my cabin?" He hesitated, his chin quivering. "I didn't mean to steal. I thought nobody lived there. The light." He looked down at the lantern, clutching it tighter. It looked alive. The flame trembled between them. Mary could see the reflection of her own face in the glass, pale, ghost-like beside the boy's. "What's your name?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "Eli. Eli Carter." His voice cracked on the last word, and she noticed then the bruises beneath the grime on his neck, the way his hands shook violently. His clothes hung loose, an old wool shirt several sizes too big, patched and threadbare, trousers cinched with a rope. Snow clung to his hair, a matted, dusty brown that caught the lantern's light in dull streaks. His eyes, beneath their exhaustion, were the gray blue of storm water. Mary knelt slowly, lowering herself to his height. The cold bit into her knees, but she didn't flinch. "Where's your home, Eli?" He looked down, eyes fixed on the snow. "Nowhere." The word came out flat, empty. After a pause, he added, "My pa worked the mines by the river. He died when it caved in. They said it was God's will. Ma got sick after that. When she stopped waking up, I just kept walking." Mary's chest tightened. She could hear the creek beneath the ice, its slow hum like a sleeping thing. "You've been out here since." He nodded, his breath shaking. "There's a barn down the river. I stay there sometimes. The horses are gone, but it's dry. The storm last night broke the roof. I saw your light. It looked like something that remembered me." Her throat closed. She wanted to scold him for taking the lantern, but how could she? She looked at him, small and trembling, a child clinging to a flame the way she had clung to faith. Instead of anger, something else stirred, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Pity first, then purpose. "Come on," she said quietly, holding out her hand. "Let's get you warm." Eli hesitated, eyes darting toward the forest as if expecting the night to punish him for accepting kindness. Then he nodded, stepping forward. Mary took his hand. It was cold as stone, small enough to vanish inside her palm. Together they walked back up the hill, the lantern between them, its light bouncing gently across the snow. Inside the shelter, the air was colder than outside. Mary set the lantern on the ground and pulled an old blanket from her bedroll. She wrapped it around his shoulders, tucking it close under his chin. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, the sound small and pitiful in the quiet. She poured water into a tin cup, warmed it over the lantern's flame, and stirred in a pinch of salt. Then she opened a jar of soup she'd saved from the chapel's charity pot. Eli drank greedily, the steam fogging his face. "I ain't eaten warm food in days," he murmured. "I can see that," Mary said softly, half smiling. "Slow down, or you'll make yourself sick." The boy looked up then, meeting her eyes. For a brief moment, something passed between them, not words but recognition, as if two lost souls had stumbled into the same light by accident. She looked away first, pretending to busy herself with the blanket. When he finished eating, he sat by the lantern, knees drawn to his chest. The flame painted him in soft gold, chasing away the gray from his skin. He stared at it without blinking, his face slack with wonder. "It's not just light," he said quietly. "It's like someone's here, watching." Mary froze. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Don't know. It just feels that way, like it's got a heart." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that it was only kerosene and glass, that warmth could be a lie. But the words caught in her throat, because as she looked at the lantern, the flame flickered strangely, once, twice, and for an instant she thought she saw a familiar curve in the light, the faint outline of a man's jaw, the slope of a smile she knew by heart. Her. Breath caught. She blinked, but the image was gone. Only the steady flame remained, small and calm, swaying as if to some rhythm she couldn't hear. Eli watched her, eyes wide, sensing the shift in her silence. "You see it too, don't you?" he whispered. Mary didn't answer. She only reached out, steadying the lantern with a trembling hand. The heat pulsed beneath her fingers, warm, alive. Outside, the wind stirred again, brushing against the tarp like fingertips on glass. The snow creaked, settling deeper around the cabin. Inside, the light glowed steady, a small sun in a world made of ice. Eli curled up beside the flame, eyelids drooping. "Thank you, ma'am," he mumbled, "for letting me stay." Mary said nothing. She sat beside him, watching the lantern as if afraid to look away. Hours passed. The boy's breathing slowed into sleep. The wind softened. Only the flame moved, steady, alive, unyielding. And in that trembling circle of light, Mary's reflection shimmered beside another, faint, blurred, but there. Samuel's. His eyes, his smile, caught for just a heartbeat in the glass before the wick steadied again. Mary pressed a hand to her mouth, unsure if she'd gasped or prayed. The light wavered once more, as if it had heard her. She closed her eyes, the warmth touching her face, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe, if only for a moment, that she was not alone. The winter did not end all at once in Silver Hollow. It lingered like a guest who had stayed too long, reluctant, silent, heavy in the air. The snow melted in patches, leaving veins of black mud across the fields, while the wind still carried a bite that felt like old sorrow. Mary rose each morning to the sound of Eli chopping wood behind the shelter, his thin arms swinging with determination that looked far too big for his small frame. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but his presence filled the emptiness in a way words never could. They worked together quietly, building fences from scavenged timber, mending the roof beam by beam, turning ruin into something like a home. The smell of pine and smoke followed them everywhere. Eli fetched water from the creek, balancing the tin pail as if it were made of glass. Mary cooked what little they had, sharing each meal in grateful silence. At night, the lantern sat between them, steady and gold. its light touching their faces as if blessing the fragile rhythm they had found. The people of Silver Hollow began to notice. Where once there had been whispers, now there were nods. Thomas Miller brought nails and lumber from town. His wife left a basket of bread at the edge of the ridge. Old Ruth Jenkins, her breath always faint and wheezing, arrived one afternoon with a jar of kerosene and 2 candles wrapped in cloth. She didn't say much, only touched Mary's shoulder and murmured, "Keep it burning, child." By the end of February, the cabin stood again, smaller than before, but strong. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. The crazy widow was no longer a ghost on the ridge. She was the woman who refused to give up. Mary didn't notice how her hands no longer trembled when she worked, or how she sometimes caught herself humming while washing the pans. Life had found its way back into the cracks grief had left behind. But faith, like fire, is tested more than once. That March, the wind changed. It began as a sigh through the trees, then rose, wild and relentless. The sky dimmed, bruised with storm clouds that rolled low over the valley. The air smelled of iron and wet earth. By dusk, the storm had arrived. Snow mixed with freezing rain, slashing sideways, driving even the strongest indoors. The roof groaned under the wind. Eli ran from the woodpile, hair plastered to his forehead, shouting over the roar. "The creek's rising!" Mary pulled her shawl tight and peered through the window. The world was a blur of white and gray. The lantern flickered on the table, its flame steady but strained, as though aware of what was coming. Then she saw it, far off, beyond the bend where the trees thinned. A column of smoke twisting through the snow, orange light pulsing behind it. Her breath caught. "The mill," she whispered. Eli looked up sharply. The old grain mill stood near the riverbank, abandoned for years except for the storage shed, Ruth's grandkids sometimes used to play in. Even from the ridge, Mary could tell something was wrong. The smoke moved too fast, spreading in violent plumes. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the lantern from the table, its handle warm against her palm. "Stay here," she told Eli, but the boy was already pulling on his coat, eyes wide with fear. "They'll die if we don't go." The storm clawed at them as they ran. The wind howled down the valley, tearing at their clothes, filling their mouths with snow. The ground was slick and uneven, the creek swollen and wild beside the path. Through the chaos, the glow of fire guided them, a desperate, angry beacon against the white. When they reached the mill, the scene looked like something torn from a nightmare. Flames crawled up the wooden walls, snapping and twisting, devouring the dry timbers with a hunger that sounded alive. The old wheel beside the creek groaned and splintered under the heat. Smoke rolled low, choking the air. "Help!" The cry came faintly from inside, a child's voice, then another. Mary didn't think. She threw her shawl over her face and ran straight into the smoke. The heat hit her like a wall. The lantern swung from her hand, its glow barely visible in the thick haze. "Where are you?" she shouted, her voice raw. Through the crackle and roar, a sob answered her. 2 small figures huddled near a fallen beam, Ruth's grandchildren, Emma and Caleb. Emma, 7, her hair tangled with soot, clutched her little brother's arm. Caleb, 5, cried soundlessly, his face streaked with ash. The beam above them creaked, threatening to fall. Mary dropped to her knees, shoving debris aside. "It's all right. Come here." She reached for Emma, pulling her free. Eli appeared behind her, coughing, eyes watering from the smoke. "Get the boy," he shouted. Together, they dragged the children toward the door. The air shimmered with heat. The sound of collapsing beams cracked like thunder. Mary stumbled, feeling her strength falter, but Eli caught her arm, guiding her forward. They burst through the doorway as the roof gave way behind them, a plume of sparks erupting into the night. Outside, the snow hissed where the fire met it. The world was chaos. Wind, smoke, flame, and cold colliding in a terrible dance. Mary fell to her knees, gasping, clutching the lantern to her chest. Its flame still burned, defiant against the storm. She turned to look for Eli, to tell him they'd made it, but he was gone. At first, she thought he'd fallen behind. She rose unsteadily, calling his name into the wind. "Eli!" Her voice vanished in the roar. The mill behind her groaned one last time and collapsed in on itself, a storm of sparks rising into the dark sky. She ran toward the ruins, searching the shadows between the flames. "Eli!" she cried again, louder now, desperate. Snow and cinders swirled together, stinging her skin. The lantern's light quivered in her grasp, casting wild circles across the ground. There was no answer, only the wind screaming through the wreckage like a warning. The creek surged nearby, dark and violent, spilling over its banks. Mary's boots sank into the slush as she stumbled closer, calling again and again until her voice broke. But the night gave nothing back, and somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of the lantern's glow, the storm swallowed his name. Night fell like a curtain of iron. The storm had not tired of its cruelty. It had only changed its voice. The snow no longer drifted softly. It screamed, tearing through the valley like a living thing. Mary stumbled through the dark, the lantern trembling in her hands, its glow a frail circle against the endless white. "Eli!" she called, her voice raw and cracking, swallowed by the wind. "Eli!" Each cry vanished into the night before it could find an echo. The cold cut deep, clawing through her coat, her lungs aching with every breath. Branches whipped at her face as she pushed into the forest, the path fading beneath the snow. All around her, the storm howled like the memory of every loss she had ever endured. The lantern's flame flickered low, struggling for air, and she bent close to shield it, whispering, "Don't you die on me, too." The river roared nearby, swollen, wild, breaking free from its icy banks. She followed the sound, half stumbling, half running, boots slipping on the frozen ground. Her fingers had gone numb, but she clung to the lantern as though it were her heartbeat. The light wavered across the snow, revealing broken branches, footprints, and then something else. A scrap of fabric caught on a rock. She moved closer, the glow catching on the edge of torn wool. Eli's coat. It lay half buried in snow, stiff with ice, one sleeve ripped clean away. For a long moment, Mary couldn't breathe. The world tilted, sound fell away, and all she heard was the rush of blood in her ears. Her knees gave out. She sank into the snow beside the coat, pressing the lantern close against her chest. The metal burned cold against her palms. "No," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please God, no." The wind answered her with a scream that sounded almost like laughter. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to the lantern. The flame trembled, its light stuttering across her tears. Her lips moved in broken prayers, for mercy, for strength, for anything but this hollow silence. "Don't take him," she murmured. "Not after everything." Then, faintly, beneath the roar of the storm, a sound, a cry. Mary's head jerked up. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, but then it came again, soft and hoarse, from somewhere near the riverbank. She rose unsteadily, clutching the lantern high. "Eli!" she shouted. The cry answered, weaker this time, but real. She ran toward it, stumbling through drifts that reached her knees. The river was half frozen, black water twisting beneath a skin of ice. Near the wooden bridge, a relic of the old trail, she saw movement. A small shape huddled beneath the bridge's arch, half buried in snow. Mary dropped to her knees, sliding down the bank, snow filling her boots. The lantern swung wildly, its light catching on pale fingers clutching something tight against a small chest. "Eli," she breathed, crawling forward. His face was white as bone, his lashes crusted with ice, his breath shallow. She brushed the snow away and pulled him into her arms. His body was limp, cold seeping through the blanket of rags. Then she saw it, what he was holding. Her lantern. The glass was cracked, the brass dented, but the flame inside still glowed, weak, shivering, alive. Her throat closed as she pressed her hand against his cheek. "You fool boy," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You never should have come back for it." Eli's eyelids fluttered. He looked up at her with the ghost of a smile. His voice came out barely more than a breath. "I didn't let it go." Mary let out a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh. She cradled him closer, wrapping her coat around his trembling body. The lantern's light painted them both in trembling gold. For the first time since the fire, she felt warmth that was not from flame, but from life, fragile, stubborn, and wholly real. The storm raged around them, but Mary's movements became deliberate, certain. She stood, clutching Eli with one arm, the lantern in the other. Step by step, she made her way up the riverbank, her boots sinking deep into the drifts. Each breath burned like smoke. Behind her, the bridge groaned under the weight of ice, a long, low creak echoing through the night. By the time she reached the ridge, a faint glow moved toward her through the dark. Lanterns, horses, and shouting voices. Sheriff Walt Danner led the way, his broad shoulders dusted with snow, his hat pulled low against the wind. His mustache was rimed with frost, and his eyes widened when he saw her. "Mary, Lord above, we've been looking for you for hours," he shouted, running forward. The men behind him carried blankets and torches, their faces ghostly in the flickering light. "Is he?" "He's alive," she rasped, "but he needs warmth. Now." Danner nodded sharply. "Get them both on the wagon," he barked, his voice firm but kind. One of the men, young Peter Cole, the blacksmith's son, took Eli from her arms with surprising gentleness. Mary followed, holding the lantern close even as her knees trembled. When they reached town, Ruth Jenkins was waiting at the chapel, her old hands fluttering like frightened birds. They laid Eli by the fire, wrapping him in quilts. Ruth poured broth down his throat with slow patience, whispering prayers between each breath. The sheriff stood by the doorway, shaking his head. "They say you ran into the mill," he muttered. "Saved those kids with your bare hands." Mary didn't answer. She sat beside Eli, her eyes fixed on the lantern resting near his bed. Its flame had grown steady again, casting long, peaceful shadows across the chapel walls. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside gleamed white and untouched, as if the valley itself had taken a breath of relief. News spread quickly, how the widow and the orphan had saved 2 lives, guided by a light that refused to die. Some called it a miracle. Others said it was proof that faith, once lit, can survive anything. That evening, Mary sat by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Eli slept under her quilt, his breathing even now. The lantern burned quietly beside them, its reflection dancing in her eyes. She watched the boy's chest rise and fall, and something in her heart eased. Not joy, not sorrow, but the stillness that comes after both. She thought of Samuel, of the nights she had begged for meaning in the dark. Perhaps this was it. Not a punishment, not a test, but a gift returned. The lantern, she realized, wasn't just a sign from God. It was her second chance. Outside, the last of the snow slid from the roof with a soft sigh, and for the first time in years, the silence felt kind. Spring came to Silver Hollow, like an old friend finally returning after a long silence. The snow receded slowly, curling into rivulets that ran laughing down the hillsides, feeding the fields that had lain barren for months. Grass pushed through the thawed earth, green as forgiveness. The wind lost its edge, carrying instead the scent of wet soil and pine sap. In the mornings, sunlight spilled over the ridge and into the valley, glinting off rooftops that no longer smoked with loss, but shimmered with the quiet rhythm of living. Mary stood at the doorway of her rebuilt home, hands folded around a cup of tea that steamed against the lingering chill. The house was small, humble, but sturdier this time, timber joined with care, each beam smoothed by Eli's patient hands. There were 2 chairs by the door now, one for her, one for the boy, who no longer looked like a boy. The lantern hung in the window between them, glowing faintly in the morning light, its flame steady, faithful, almost content. Eli came up the path carrying a bucket of water from the creek, his shoulders broader now, his stride firm. He was 14 by then, tall for his age but still shy, with a quiet dignity that made the townsfolk pause before they spoke to him. When he smiled, which wasn't often, it was the kind that softened the air. "Roof held through the last rain," he said, setting the bucket down. Mary nodded, a small, proud smile tugging at her lips. Life in Silver Hollow began to move again. The Millers rebuilt their barn. The chapel bell rang every Sunday. Even old Ruth Jenkins, though slower now, still brought candles wrapped in cloth. Neighbors came often to Mary's porch, some with pies, some with lumber, others simply to sit and watch the light that still burned in her window. What had once been called madness was now spoken of in softer tones. They called her the keeper of the flame. and children whispered that if you wished by her lantern, good things might find their way home. Years folded over each other like pages worn thin by time. The valley changed, but the light did not. It burned through countless nights, through harvests and winters, through births and farewells. And when the years had drawn their circle, and Eli had grown into a man, he took to sitting on that same porch after dusk, the lantern beside him, its glow caught in the silver threads of his hair. Mary had grown frail by then. Her hair had turned the color of moonlight, her hands trembling as they tried to strike a match. She laughed at her own fumbling, the sound low and kind. "Seems the world's turning faster than these old fingers," she said. Eli, now a carpenter by trade, smiled and gently took the match from her hand. "Then let me help it slow down a little." He lit the lantern for her, as she once had for him, shielding the flame with his palm. When the first summer rain came, she sat by the window, watching the world turn green again. Her voice has softened with age, her words few but deliberate. "You've done well, Eli," she said one evening, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Your father would have been proud." Eli looked up from his workbench, startled. "I never told you about my father," he said. Mary smiled faintly. "You didn't have to." By the following autumn, Eli had found his calling beyond wood and nails. He became a preacher, not the kind who thundered from pulpits, but one who spoke in quiet rooms, his words gentle, his hand still smelling faintly of pine and oil. He carried the lantern with him wherever he went, setting it beside him before every sermon. People came from miles around to hear him speak of faith, not as a command, but as a companion, something small and steadfast that lived inside ordinary people. He never spoke long, never quoted much scripture. He would simply gesture toward the flame and say, "This light once saved a widow." But the truth is, it saved a lost boy too. The congregation would fall silent, some bowing their heads, others weeping softly because they understood. And still, every night, the lantern burned. Through seasons of abundance and of grief, through weddings and storms, its glow remained unchanged. It became part of the valley's rhythm, a pulse in the dark, the same steady warmth that had once led two souls through fire and snow. When Mary's final winter came, it arrived gently, without storm or sorrow. She slept more often, her breaths slower but peaceful. On her last evening, Eli sat beside her bed, the lantern burning on the nightstand. The room was warm with its light. Mary's hand found his, her fingers cool and fragile. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice no louder than the flame. "You'll keep it burning." "I promise," Eli said. And when dawn came, she was gone, her face serene, turned toward the window where the lantern still glowed. They buried her on the hill overlooking the valley, where the wind hummed through the grass like a hymn. The townsfolk came in quiet procession, their faces lit by candles. When it was over, Eli placed the lantern at the head of her grave. Its glass was clouded with age, its brass tarnished, yet when he touched the wick, the flame came alive, soft, golden, unwavering. It burned through the night. And when morning rose, pale and tender, dew clinging to every blade of grass, the lantern was still warm to the touch. Years later, when people asked Eli about miracles, he would smile and shake his head. "Miracles," he'd say, "they're quieter than you think. Sometimes faith doesn't roar like thunder, it just stays." And somewhere on that hill in Silver Hollow, where wildflowers bloom every spring, the old lantern still flickers at dusk, a small, steadfast light that once belonged to a widow, then to a boy, and finally to a valley that learned how to believe again. Sometimes life's hardest trials don't come with thunder. They come with silence, with the waiting, the enduring, the small, unseen choices that define the strength of our hearts. And in that silence, the faintest light we keep burning becomes the quiet evidence that hope never truly dies. This story reminds us that even through loss and ashes, we can still find light, through kindness, through faith, and through the simple act of sharing what little warmth we have left. Mary didn't just save a child, she rekindled faith in an entire town, showing that sometimes it takes only one small flame to guide countless hearts home. So, Wherever you are tonight, may you keep a little light of your own, something that steadies you when the world grows cold, because you never know who might find their way by its glow. Before we part, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Share your city or your story in the comments below. And if this tale touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might just warm your heart again. May your night be gentle and your light unshakable.